The most useful thing anybody ever told me about the ground in my county was told to me by a woman who hauled dead livestock for a living, and it was 4 sentences long, and it goes like this. You will smell it before you are in it. It smells like eggs gone bad. When you stop smelling it, that does not mean it is gone. That means it has already taken your nose, and you have about a minute. I have had that in my head every working day for 6 years now. I say it to myself in the truck the way other men listen to the radio. My name is Cole Redding. I am 41 years old, and I am a farrier, which means I trim and shoe horses for a living, and I have done it in the same 4 counties in southeastern Kansas since I was 23. It is not a romantic job. It is 8 hours a day, bent double, under an animal that weighs 1,100 pounds and has opinions, with your back locked at an angle no back was designed for, holding a hoof between your knees while you rasp and nip and nail. Farriers do not retire. Farriers get replaced when their spine finally quits. There is one detail of that job that matters more than any other detail in this story, and I want to put it down early so you carry it with you. When I am working, my head is about 2 feet off the ground. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, for 18 years. 2 feet off the ground is not where most people live. Most people breathe at 5.5 feet, walking around, moving air with their bodies. I breathe down where the horses breathe, and down where the dogs breathe, and down where the cats and the toddlers and the field mice breathe, and it turns out that in my county there is a very real and very physical difference between the air at 5 feet and the air at 2. I did not know that for 18 years. I want to tell you about a mare named Dolly, because that is where it starts. Dolly belonged to a man named Wendell Ackley, who ran about 90 head of cattle and kept 4 horses on a place west of town, out where the pavement quits and the road turns into a rock strip that beats the shocks out of anything you own. Wendell was 71, a widower, and one of maybe 6 men in the county who still worked cattle horseback because he preferred it, not because he had to. Dolly was a 15-year-old quarter-horse mare with a good mind and an ugly head, and I had trimmed her feet every 8 weeks for 11 years. That is over 70 times. 70 times I had put my hands on that animal. It was the last week of March, warm for March, no wind at all, which in Kansas is worth mentioning because there is always wind. I pulled in around 7 in the morning and set up in the usual spot, which was a patch of hardpan in the corner of the lot by the loading chute where the ground was level and there was shade by 9. Wendell led Dolly out of the barn and started across the lot toward me. She got about halfway and stopped. Not spooked. I want to be careful with that word from here on out, because the difference between a spooked horse and what I saw is the entire point. A spooked horse is a firework. It goes up, it goes sideways, it wants out, and it will tell you loudly and physically exactly which direction it wants to go. I have been kicked, stepped on, slammed into a wall, and knocked cold once by spooked horses, and I can read them the way you read a person raising their voice. Dolly did not go up. She planted, all 4 feet, weight settled back, head down, ears loose and forward. She was not afraid. She was standing there like a parked truck, calmly declining. Wendell pulled on the lead. Nothing. He clucked to her. Nothing. He got behind her and slapped her hip, which he would not normally do, and she took 1 step sideways and planted again. He looked at me across the lot, and he had an expression I did not like at all, because it was not confusion. It was recognition. He said, "She will not come to that corner." I said something about the shade, or the chute, or the smell of the shoeing rig. He said, "Cole, she has come to that corner 70 times. So I moved. I picked up my box and my stand and my anvil, and I set up 30 feet north, in the middle of the lot, in the sun, on ground that was worse. And Dolly walked to me on a loose lead like nothing had ever happened in her life, and stood there and dozed while I trimmed all 4 feet, and I got her done in 40 minutes and did not think about it again for 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, my dog would not get out of the truck. I had a blue heeler named Skip, who rode with me every day of his life and who thought the whole county belonged to him. Skip did not stay in trucks. Skip came out of a truck like the door owed him money. And at a place east of town, at a stock pond in a bottom pasture where I had shot a gelding maybe 40 times, Skip got to the edge of the seat with his front feet on the running board and would not go any further. He looked at that pasture. Then he looked at me. Then he backed up into the cab and lay down under the seat, which he had never done, not in a thunderstorm, not on the 4th of July. I carried him out. I want you to hear that, because it is the thing I would give a great deal to take back. I picked up my dog, who was telling me in the only language he had that we should not go into that bottom, and I carried him 90 feet down the slope and set him on the ground because I thought it was funny. He was fine. He got up and shook himself and went and sat by the truck the whole time I worked, which he had also never done. But I was down in that bottom for 2 hours with my head 2 feet off the ground, and by the time I drove out of there, I had a headache that started at the base of my skull and moved forward until it was sitting behind my eyes, and I was so tired that I pulled over on the county road and slept for 20 minutes in the driver's seat with the engine running. I was 39 years old. I told myself I needed to lay off the coffee. I want to talk about the rings now. Anybody who has lived in that country their whole life has seen them, and nobody has ever thought about them for longer than 4 seconds. In the pastures out there, you will find pale circles in the grass. They run from about 8 feet across to about 30. Inside the circle, the grass comes up thin and yellow, or it does not come up at all, and you get bare dirt with a crust on it. And the edge of the circle is sharp, sharper than anything natural has a right to be. We called them fungus rings. Every single person in that county called them fungus rings. There is a real thing that makes rings in grass, and it is a fungus, and it is common. And so for about 70 years, everybody in Loomis County looked at these pale, sharp circles and said, "Huh, fungus," and went on. The fungus rings I had actually seen in other counties are green. That is the whole point of them. The fungus feeds the grass at the edge, and the ring is a deep green band. Ours were the opposite. Ours were pale in the middle, and there was no green band anywhere. I noticed that in a parking lot in Independence in April, standing next to a truck, reading a laminated sign on a lawn service booth about ring fungus with a picture on it, and the picture did not look like anything I had ever seen in my life. I stood there long enough that the man in the booth asked if I was all right. Once I saw it, I could not unsee it. I started counting them from the truck. 9 on the Ackley place, 14 on a section south of the highway, 22, and I quit counting, on the old Vandy ground east of the river. And here is the part that made the hair stand up on my arms in a way I still remember. They were not scattered. They were in lines. Straight lines, evenly spaced, running north and south and crossing other lines running east and west. Not perfectly, weathered and broken up by 60 years of plowing and building and roads. But once your eye caught the spacing, you could not lose it. And the spacing was the same everywhere, and the spacing was somewhere around 660 feet. 660 feet is 1/8 of a mile. It is a survey number. It is a number a person chose. Nothing in nature is spaced on a survey grid. I sat in my truck in a pasture in April, with a rasp still in my hand, and I understood, at least at the level of the skin, that I was looking at something somebody had built, and had built a long time ago, and had walked away from. I want to slow down here and give you one ordinary day, because everything I have told you so far sounds like a man finding clues, and that is not what it was like. It was like being tired. Take the last Thursday in April. Nothing happened that day. I want you to understand that in advance, so that you are watching the right thing. I was up at 5. I am always up at 5. The truck is a flatbed with a shoeing box built into the back and a propane forge bolted down behind the cab. And there are about 400 pounds of steel in that box in 16 sizes, and every morning of my life starts with me checking that the propane bottle is not empty. Because a farrier who runs out of gas in the middle of a shoeing job on a horse that is already half done is a farrier who has just ruined somebody's morning and his own reputation. Coffee in the truck, Skip in the passenger seat with his chin on the console. Out of Quillen at 10 after 6, east on the county road with the sun coming up flat and orange across the wheat. First place was Ruby Nachtigal, who was 68 and ran a boarding barn with 19 head in it, and who is the single best client any farrier in that country ever had, because she paid the day she was billed, and she had every horse caught and standing in the alley when I pulled in. I shod 6 that morning, front shoes on 4, all 4 on 2. Let me tell you what that actually is, physically, because people picture a blacksmith and a hammer and something rustic, and it is not rustic, it is labor. You start by picking up a foot. That means bending at the waist, running your hand down the back of the leg, and taking somewhere between 40 and 140 pounds of horse leg onto your own thigh, and then holding it there while you work. Your back is bent, your knees are bent, your head, and this is the part that matters, your head is roughly 2 feet off the ground and it stays there. Then you pull the old shoe. Then you nip the excess wall off with a pair of nippers that takes both hands and most of your shoulder. Then you rasp it flat and level means level to the inside of that particular horse, not level to the world. Then you shape a steel shoe to that foot, which is hot work at the forge and cold work on the anvil, and involves walking back and forth 8 or 9 times. Then you nail it on. 6 or 7 nails, driven at an angle that puts them through the wall and out the side without touching anything that hurts. And you can feel through the hammer whether you have it right, and if you do not, you back the nail out and start over. Then you do it again, and again, and again. 4 feet per horse, 6 horses, 24 times. Ruby brought out iced tea at 9, and I drank it sitting on my toolbox, and I could not get up right away. And I made a joke about it, and she made a joke back, and neither of us thought a thing about it. Second place was a fellow south of the highway with 2 Belgian draft geldings, which are the hardest work in the trade because the feet are the size of dinner plates and the horses lean on you like furniture. 2 hours. Third place was a barrel racer with a mare who has to be sedated, so there is a 40-minute wait built into the appointment, and I spent that 40 minutes lying on the bench seat of my truck with my arm over my eyes because my head was pounding. And I remember thinking, in a mild sort of way, that I had been having a lot of headaches lately. That is the day. That is the whole day. There is no incident in it. But look at what is in it. I could not stand up from a toolbox at 9 in the morning, at 39 years old. I lay down in a truck at 1 in the afternoon because my head hurt. I was short with the barrel racer about her mare in a way that I noticed on the drive home and felt bad about and did not call to apologize for because I was too tired to call anybody. I got home at 6 and ate standing at the counter and was asleep in a chair by 8. Ruby Nachtigal's barn has 2 pale rings in the paddock behind it. There is a circle on the 1922 lease map about 40 feet outside her arena fence. The barrel racer's place has 4. And I drove home that Thursday with a headache and a sore back, and I would have told you, if you had stopped me on the road and asked, that I was in good health for a man in my line of work, and that I was doing fine, and that nothing whatsoever was wrong. That is the actual shape of it. Not clues, not dread, not a mystery. Just a man getting quietly worse for 18 years. At a rate slow enough that every single stage of it felt like the normal price of the life he had chosen. The person who put the whole thing in my hands was named Verna Stokes. Verna was 76, and she had spent 41 years running the dead stock service for 4 counties. That is not a job people think about, but every county needs one. When a cow dies in a lot or a horse goes down in a pasture, somebody has to come with a winch truck and take it away. And for 4 decades in our part of Kansas, that somebody was Verna and, before her, her husband. She retired in her 60s and then unretired because there was nobody else. And when I met her, she was still driving that truck 3 days a week with a shoulder that did not work and a hip that worked worse. I went to her because of an entirely different problem. I had a client whose 2 horses died 3 months apart, both found down in the same corner of the same trap, and the insurance paperwork was a mess, and Verna had hauled both of them, and I needed the dates off her tickets. She had the dates. She had every date. Verna kept books, not for sentiment. She kept them because she got paid per head, and because she had been audited in 1988 and had decided she would never be caught short again. So there was a shelf in her back room with 41 years of spiral-bound logbooks on it, and each line in each book was a date, a name, an address or a legal description, an animal, and a code. I asked about the codes. H was hauled. That was most of them. P was pending, meaning she was coming back with a bigger truck. R was refused, meaning the owner changed their mind or could not pay. And then there was N. There were not many N entries, maybe 60 in 41 years, and every time I asked her about N, she found something else to talk about, which I did not push on because she was 76 and I was in her house. What I did instead, because I am not a clever man, but I am a stubborn one, was ask if I could photograph her books. She let me. I think she had been waiting a long time for somebody to ask. It took 11 evenings on my kitchen table, 41 years, a little over 9,000 entries. I pulled out every entry that had an address or a legal description precise enough to place, which was about 6,000 of them, and I plotted them on a county plat map I bought from the Register of Deeds for $9. I want to describe what that looked like, because I had no idea what I was making. I thought I was making a picture of where livestock die, which is a picture of where livestock are, which is a picture of pastures. I expected a blob. I expected the whole county shaded in, heavier around the good grass. I got a lattice, 6,000 dots, and they were not in a blob. They were in rows. There were long, empty stretches of country with almost nothing. And then there were corridors and intersections where the dots piled up on top of each other, and the corridors ran north and south and east and west, and they crossed at intervals, and the intervals were the same intervals as the pale rings in the grass. I sat there with a felt pen in my hand for a long time. Then I got up and drove to Verna Stokes at 10 o'clock at night and knocked on her door, and when she opened it, I held up that map, and she looked at it, and her face did something I had never seen an old person's face do. She went absolutely still, the way an animal goes still. She said, "You did that yourself?" I said I did. She said, "How long did it take you?" I said, 11 nights. She said, "It took me 19 years, and I only got about half of it, and I did it on butcher paper." Then she let me in. I need to give you the history now, and I am going to be plain about it, because the history is not mysterious. It is just forgotten, and forgotten is worse. Southeastern Kansas is one of the oldest oil-producing regions in the United States. Not one of. It is essentially the first one west of the Mississippi River. Commercial production started in the 1890s, and by 1915, the country I am describing to you was a forest of wooden derricks. There are photographs in the county museum. You cannot see the ground in them. It looks like a burnt pine woods. The oil was shallow. That is the crucial technical fact, and everything follows from it. The producing formations there sit at 800 to 1,600 feet, which by oil field standards is nothing, which meant that in 1920, A man with a cable tool rig and $400 could put in a well in 9 days. So they did, endlessly. Wells were drilled on 8-acre and 10-acre spacing, and then on 5-acre spacing because leases were small and every operator was trying to drain his neighbor. 5-acre spacing works out to a well roughly every 460 feet. 10-acre spacing works out to roughly 660. 660 feet. The company that held most of the ground under and around what is now my town was called the Tri-State Petroleum Company. It was incorporated in 1909, and it was dissolved in 1934. And when it dissolved, it did what nearly every one of those outfits did, which was nothing. It did not plug its wells. It did not have to. There was no meaningful state requirement to plug an abandoned well in Kansas until decades later, and no requirement at all to keep records that anybody could find afterward. They pulled the good casing out to sell as scrap, which is the single worst thing they could have done, and then they filled the holes with whatever was standing there. There is documented evidence, statewide, of old wells plugged with cottonwood logs, with sacks of grain, with a dead mule, with nothing but the dirt kicked in around the edges. And then the derricks came down, and the grass came back, and the ground healed over the top of it. And in 1951, the town of Quillen, Kansas, incorporated on that section and built a school and a water tower and a main street 4 blocks long. Population today, 1,411. And not one person in that town in 1951 thought about what was directly underneath them, because there was nothing to see. Verna had a copy of the Tri-State lease map. Her husband got it out of a filing cabinet at an auction in 1979 and gave $9 for it, and it is 4 feet by 5 feet, and it is a hand-drawn plat from 1922 with every well the company had drilled marked on it as a small circle with a number beside it. 2,641 circles. She laid it out on her floor, and I laid my map on top of it, and we lined up the section corners. They matched. Not approximately. They matched. My 6,000 dead animals, plotted across 41 years, sat on the well locations of a company that stopped existing in 1934. There is a thing that happens in your chest when you find out that a pattern you have been chasing is real. It is not triumph. It is the opposite. It is the feeling of the floor coming up a half inch. Because I did not live outside that map. I lived at 406 North Ash Street, and there was a circle on that lease map about 110 feet behind my house, in the alley, under the spot where I parked my trailer. Here is what is actually coming out of those holes, and none of it requires you to believe anything. An abandoned well is not a plug in a hole. It is a rotted steel pipe, or, more often, an open hole, with 60 to 130 years of collapse in it, and it is a direct connection between the surface and everything underneath. Formations that were sealed off from each other for 300 million years are now in a conversation, and gas moves up through that column because gas always moves up. What comes up out of the shallow oil zones in that part of Kansas is a mixture, and the two parts that matter are methane and hydrogen sulfide. Methane is not poisonous. Methane is simply not oxygen. If enough of it comes up through your soil into a low place, it pushes the air out, and you can drown in a ditch on a clear day with nothing on your face. Hydrogen sulfide is a different animal, and it is the one I think about at night. In the oil field, they call the stuff that has it in it sour gas, and I want to give you its properties in order, because the order is what kills people. It is heavier than air. It does not rise and disperse the way you would want it to. It runs downhill, and it pools in low ground, in ditches, in cellars, in pits, in stock tank sumps, in window wells, in the bottom of a pasture, in a road cut. At low concentration, you smell it clearly. Rotten eggs, sewer, something spoiled. That smell is a genuine gift, and it is the only warning you get. and that somewhere above about 100 parts per million, it destroys your sense of smell, not gradually. It paralyzes the olfactory nerve, and it does it in seconds. And after that, you are standing in an increasing concentration of a lethal gas in perfect confidence, because the alarm has been shut off from the inside. At around 700 parts per million, a person collapses on the first or second breath. They call it knockdown. There is no staggering. There is no getting to the door. A man walking, talking upright, drops like his string was cut. That is the 4 sentences Verna Stokes told me the night I brought her the map. You will smell it before you are in it. It smells like eggs gone bad. When you stop smelling it, that does not mean it is gone. That means it has already taken your nose, and you have about a minute. I asked her, that night, sitting on her couch at midnight, what N meant in her books. She got up and got the 1983 volume and opened it to a page she did not have to look for. She said, "N'is no truck. It means I would not send the truck." I asked how she decided. She said, "The first way I decided was that I lost 2 men." And then she told it to me. And it took her about 20 minutes, and she told it the way people tell a thing they have gone over so many times that the words have worn smooth. It was August of 1977. It had been the driest summer anybody could remember. She was 32 years old, and she was pregnant with her second. And her husband was laid up with a broken wrist from a loading chute. So the truck that week was being run by his younger brother, a man named Curtis Stokes, who was 28 and who had a wife and a little girl, and who was, by every account I have ever heard, the kind of man who did the job right. The call came in from a place on the far east side of the township. A heifer had gone down in a stock pond that had been dry since the middle of June. When a pond goes dry in that country, you are left with a bowl of cracked mud, maybe 9 or 10 feet below the level of the surrounding pasture, and the cattle keep walking down into it out of habit, looking for water that is not there. Curtis backed the truck up to the bank and ran the cable down and climbed down after it to get the chain around the heifer's back legs, which is a 2-minute job that he had done 400 times. The owner of the place was a man named Junior Spears, and he was standing up on the bank. His neighbor, a man named Merle Dean, had come over because he had a tractor and because that is what people did. Verna said Curtis got down there and got about 8 feet from the animal, and he said out loud to nobody, "Something is dead down here besides this heifer." That was the smell. That was the warning. And it was a completely reasonable thing for him to say, because he was standing next to a dead cow in August, and everything about that situation told him that a rotten smell was normal and expected and meant nothing at all. Then he stopped talking and he sat down. That is what they both saw from the bank. He did not fall. He sat down, like a man who had decided to rest, and then he lay over on his side in the mud. Merle Dean went down the bank. Of course he did. It took him maybe 15 seconds to get to the bottom, and Junior Spears said afterward that Merle got about halfway across that pond bed toward Curtis, and then he stopped and turned around, and he had his hand up in front of his face, and he took 2 steps back the way he had come and went down on his knees and then went over. Junior Spears was 56 years old and had a bad leg, and that bad leg is the only reason there was anybody left to tell it. He could not run down a bank, so he did the thing his body allowed him to do, which was turn around and go up the slope toward the house, and he got a lariat and a length of chain off the tractor, and he came back. He was gone somewhere between 2 and 4 minutes. He threw the rope from the bank 11 times. That is the number he gave the sheriff, and it is in the file. 11 throws at 2 men lying face down in cracked mud from 30 feet away, alone, with a bad leg in August, in the middle of the afternoon. He got a loop on Merle Dean on the 11th throw, and he dragged him up that bank with the tractor. And by the time anybody else arrived, it had been the better part of half an hour, and both men were dead. Verna told me the next part with her hands flat on her knees. The sheriff at the time was a decent man, and he had no idea what he was looking at. He had 2 dead men at the bottom of a dry pond with no marks on them, no water, no wounds, and a witness who was hysterical. What he wrote, because the county has a form and the form has boxes, was accidental death, probable drowning or suffocation in mud. There was an inquest. Nobody tested the air, because there was no reason on earth for a rural sheriff in 1977 to test the air in a pasture. The bodies went to a funeral home in the county seat and were buried inside 4 days. And Verna said, "And this is the sentence I keep," she said. "It was written down as an accident." And it was an accident, but not the accident they wrote down. And the difference between those 2 accidents is the difference between a thing that happens once and a thing that keeps happening. She started her list 11 days later. She started it because she had to send the truck back out to that same township in September. And she sat in the cab at the top of the driveway for a long time. And then she got out a spiral notebook and wrote down the legal description of that pond and put a letter beside it. N. No truck. 41 years and about 60 entries, and every single one of them is somebody who is alive because a woman who hauled dead animals for a living decided that she was going to keep a private record of the places that took people. Nobody ever asked her for it. Not once. In 4 decades, did any agency, any office, any official of any kind ask Verna Stokes what she knew? I asked her about that, and she laughed at me, which she did not do often. She said, "Cole, I picked up dead cows. Who exactly do you think was going to ask me anything?" She said, "After that, I did not go down in anything, and I started keeping a list of where I would not go. And after about 19 years of that list, my husband looked at it and said, 'Verna, this is a map.' I said, 'Why did nobody do anything?' And she gave me a look that I have earned the right to give people myself now. And she said, 'Cole, who is nobody? Say the name.' That question is the actual center of this story, and it is not underground. There is no villain here. That is the thing that took me longest to accept, and it is the thing that makes it worse instead of better. There is no company hiding a report. Tri-State Petroleum has not existed since 1934. Its officers are all dead. Its records were not sealed. They were thrown away, and probably burned, and probably by somebody who had no idea he was doing anything at all. The state of Kansas does have an abandoned well plugging program, and it is real, and the people in it are serious people doing good work, and I have talked to them, and they were kind to me. The problem they gave me in numbers is this. The state has plugged somewhere in the tens of thousands of wells. The estimate of undocumented wells still out there, statewide, wells that exist in the ground but appear in no record anywhere, runs into the tens of thousands more, and some estimates go higher, and nobody actually knows. And the reason nobody knows is that you cannot find a hole in the ground that is 110 years old and has grass growing over it unless you either fly a magnetometer over every acre of the state or you get very lucky. Plugging one well properly costs somewhere between $20,000 and $150,000, depending on depth and condition and what is in the hole. Do that arithmetic against 2,641 circles on one hand-drawn map from 1922, in one township, in one county, in a state that has hundreds of townships with the same history. Nobody is hiding it. It is all published. There are agency documents you can read this afternoon. It is just too big and too old and too boring. And it is under a town of 1,400 people that nobody outside 4 counties has ever heard of, and that is how it stays where it is. I bought a meter in June. 4 gas monitor, the kind pipeline hands and refinery workers wear on their collar. Oxygen, carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and combustible gas. $340, which for a farrier in a bad month is a real number, and my sister told me I had lost my mind. I want to walk you through the first morning I wore it, because that is the morning my life divided into before and after. I clipped it to my shirt collar, which is where you are supposed to wear it, up near your face, and I drove out to a place south of the highway to trim a pair of mules. Nothing. Flat readings, oxygen 20.9, everything else 0. I worked 3 hours and the thing never made a sound, and I felt like an idiot who had spent $340 on a paperweight. Then I drove to the Ackley place. I set my rig up in that corner of the lot by the loading chute, the corner where Dolly had refused to come in March 3 months earlier. The meter went off before I got the anvil off the tailgate. Hydrogen sulfide, 9 parts per million. Not enough to kill anybody. Well and truly enough to give you a headache and burn your eyes and make you tired and stupid for the rest of the day. Enough that 8 hours a day for 18 years is not a series of small nothings. It is a career. And then I did something that I still think was the correct thing to do and that I would not do again. I took the meter off my collar and I set it on the ground, on the hardpan, where a horse's nose goes and where my head goes when I'm working. 28 parts per million. Standing up at my collar, 9. Lying on the dirt, 28. That is the whole story of my county in 2 numbers. There is a different world down there. The animals have been living in it since before the town existed, and they have been telling us about it for 100 years with the only sentence they know how to make, which is to stop walking. Wendell Ackley came out of the barn while I was crouched over a shrieking yellow box in the corner of his lot. I showed him the number. I explained what it was. He listened to all of it without saying one word, and then he looked out across his own ground, 90 head and 4 horses and a house his grandfather built, and he asked me one question. He said, "How much is this place worth after you write that number down?" I did not answer him, because there was not an answer, and because we both already knew it. Now I have to tell you about Owen, and this is the part one do not tell in person. Owen was my sister Tessa's boy, 22 years old, built like a fence post, and he had come to work for me in May because he had washed out of a diesel program in Pittsburgh and needed something to do with his hands. He was good at it, better than I was at 22. Horses liked him, which is not a small thing, and he had the temperament, which is rarer than the strength. It was the 2nd week of August. It had rained hard the night before, 2.5 inches, and then the wind had quit completely, which after a rain in August out there gives you a morning like the inside of a mouth. I need to explain the rain, because the rain is what did it. When soil is dry, gas coming up a rotted well bore leaks out over a wide area and disperses into the air, and mostly nothing happens. When soil is saturated, the water seals the pores at the surface like a lid. The gas cannot come up through the ground anymore, so it goes sideways, following whatever path it can find, and it comes out concentrated wherever there is an opening. A road ditch cut, a gopher hole, a crack in a foundation, the gravel around a buried pipe, an old cellar. And after a heavy rain, the barometric pressure has usually dropped, which makes everything underground push harder, and if the wind has died, you get a temperature inversion at dawn where the cold air lies on the ground in a sheet and nothing mixes. Rain, calm, and first light. Those 3 together are the worst hour in Loomis County, and I would not have been able to tell you that in August, because I did not learn it until October. We were at a place on the north side, an old homestead where the house had burned in the 80s and the family had kept the ground and run yearlings on it. There is a cellar there, not a basement, a storm cellar, the kind they dug by hand 100 years ago, a hole with a concrete cap and a set of steps going down under a slanted steel door, standing all by itself in a pasture 40 feet from where the house used to be. A calf had gotten in. The door had rusted through at the hinge, and the wind had laid it back, and a 200-pound heifer calf had gone down those steps in the night and could not get back up, and she was down there bawling. Now, on that lease map, there is a circle about 90 feet from that cellar, and the ground between them is a shallow swale that runs downhill from the circle to the cellar door. I did not know that at the time. I knew the map existed. I had not memorized 2,641 circles. Owen went first. He was younger and faster, and he was already moving when I said his name. He got 3 steps down, and I heard him say, clear as anything, "Smells like a sewer down here." And then I heard him say, "It quit." 2 words. It quit. I have spent 6 years trying to describe what happened in my body when he said that. And the closest I have come is this. There was no fear in it. Fear takes time to arrive. What there was instead was a kind of terrible arithmetic that ran all the way through me in less than a second, because I had heard Verna Stokes say those 4 sentences on her couch in April, and I had not understood until that instant that they were not advice. They were a countdown, and the countdown had started. I did not go down. I want to be honest with you about why, because it was not courage and it was not wisdom. It was that Verna had told me about her husband's brother and the neighbor, and about how 2 men died in that pond and the third lived because he ran for a rope instead of climbing down. And that story was sitting closer to the front of my mind than any thought of my own. Every year in this country, people die in confined spaces. And about 60% of them are people who went in to save somebody else. That number is not folklore. It is in the federal statistics, and it has been stable for decades. The first man goes down because he does not know. The second man goes down because he loves the first man. The gas does not care about the difference. I got a rope. There was a lariat in my truck because there is always a lariat in my truck. I ran to it. And I came back, and I lay flat on my stomach on the grass about 8 feet from the cellar mouth with my face turned away and my arm out, and I threw a loop down into a hole I could not see into. It took 4 throws. I do not remember 2 and 3. On the 4th throw, the loop went over him, and I got it under one arm and around his chest, and I got up on my knees, and then on my feet, and I hauled a 180-pound man up 11 concrete steps by dragging him on his back with a rope over my shoulder. And he came out of that hole gray, with his eyes half open, and his tongue out, and his mouth full of dirt from the steps. He was not breathing. I did compressions on wet grass in a pasture 40 miles from a hospital while the calf bawled underneath us. He started on his own at some point. I could not tell you how long. The ambulance out of the county seat took 26 minutes, and the 2 men on it did not go down those steps either, and I have never been so glad of anything in my life as I was of the way the older one stopped at the cellar mouth and put his hand out flat and said, "Nobody goes down there." Owen spent 4 days in the hospital in Pittsburgh. He has permanent damage to his sense of smell. He has trouble with words sometimes, a very specific trouble where he knows a thing and cannot get the name of it, and it comes and goes, and it is worse when he is tired. He is 28 now, and he is a good hand, and he is not the same, and my sister has not spoken more than 9 words to me since that August. I want to say a little more about Owen, because I have made him sound like an event, and he is a person, and he is still here. He came back to work in November of that year. Nobody asked him to. I had not called him, because I did not know how to call him, and one Tuesday morning he was standing in my driveway at 6 with his boots on. I said something stupid. I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "I am not going to sit in a house." So he came back, and for about 8 months he was not good at the work anymore, and both of us knew it, and neither of us said it. His hands were fine. His hands were always fine. What was gone was the word for things. He would be standing at the truck box, and he would need a size 2, and he could see it in his head, and he could not get the name of it out, and he would stand there with his hand out and his jaw working, and I learned to just hand him the shoe and say nothing. It comes and goes. It is worse when he is tired, and it is much worse in the heat. He is 28 now, and he has his own book of business and about 70 clients, and he is better at this than I ever was, and if you met him at a barn, you would not notice a thing. He cannot smell, not smoke, not gas, not anything. That is permanent, and it is the part that keeps me up, because the one warning system a person has out there is the one thing that August took away from him. So he wears 2 meters, one on his collar and one on his belt, and he checks them out loud every single time before he picks up a foot, and he does it in front of clients even though it makes him look strange, because he decided a long time ago that looking strange is a price he can pay. My sister and I are not what we were. Tess did not scream at me, and she did not accuse me of anything, and honestly I think it would have been easier if she had. What she did was become polite with me. We see each other at holidays. She asks how I am, and I tell her, and she says that is good. 4 years after it happened, she called me on a Thursday for no reason, and we talked for an hour, and neither of us mentioned it. And when we hung up, I sat down on the floor of my kitchen. That is where we are. I will take it. I do not blame her. I have gone back over it 1,000 times. I could have said, wait. I could have said, let me get the meter. The meter was in the truck, 40 feet away, and I did not send him for it because it did not occur to me that a hole in a pasture on a Tuesday was a place where a person dies. The calf died down there. They pumped it out with a fan on a tripod 2 days later and hauled her out with a chain. The county filled that cellar with rock and dirt 3 months after and did not test anything and did not tell anybody why, and the man on the road crew told me it was for liability. I want to talk about Elmer Voss, because Elmer is the other end of the road I was walking down, and I got to see it in advance, which is a thing almost nobody gets. Elmer Voss shod horses in Loomis County for 51 years. He is the man whose route I took over when he quit, and everybody in 4 counties knew him. And there are still barns out there with his initials scratched in the wood by the tie rail. He lives in a care home in Independence now. He is 83. I started going to see him in the fall after the cellar because I had a question and because I had run out of living people to ask. Here is what Elmer Voss is like. If you take him out to the courtyard where they keep 2 old ponies for the residents to look at, and you put a rasp in his hand and pick up a foot, he will trim it perfectly, balanced, level, correct. His hands know the whole job. 51 years of it are in his forearms, and they have not gone anywhere. And when he sets the foot down, he cannot tell you the name of his daughter, who is standing 3 feet away, and who comes every Sunday. The staff call it dementia, and it may be. I am not qualified to say otherwise, and I do not pretend to be. But I asked a specialist in Pittsburgh, a woman who deals in occupational exposure, whether 51 years of low-level hydrogen sulfide at knee height in a county sitting on 2,600 unplugged wells could produce a man like that, and she did not tell me yes. She told me that chronic low-level hydrogen sulfide exposure is associated with persistent effects on memory, attention, mood, and the sense of smell. She told me the research is real but thin, because the population that gets exposed like that is rural and poor and scattered and does not get studied. She told me that the effects are cumulative and that the only treatment anybody has ever found for any of it is to stop being exposed. And then she said the thing that I did not want and that I have not been able to put down. She said, in a very level voice, that a man who has spent decades bent over with his head near the ground has an exposure history no ordinary medical history would ever capture, because nobody asks a person how high off the ground he breathes. I went every other Sunday for most of a year. I want to describe those visits properly, because they are the quietest part of this, and they frightened me more than the cellar did. The first time, I went in with a question written on a piece of paper in my shirt pocket because I had rehearsed it in the truck and did not trust myself. The question was whether he had ever known of a place in the county where a horse would not go. He looked at the paper. He looked at me. He said, "Are you the boy that does the mail?" His daughter, whose name is Corinne and who drives 40 minutes each way every Sunday of her life, told me not to take it personally and not to correct him, because correcting him only made him anxious and did not make him remember. She said the rule was to go where he was instead of trying to bring him back. So on the second visit, I did not ask him anything. I sat with him for 2 hours and let him talk. And what he talked about was steel. He talked about a supplier in Iola that quit in the 80s. He talked about the difference between a keg shoe and one you make, and about how a man could tell the maker of a shoe by the way the heel was finished. And he was right about all of it, and his hands moved the whole time as if the tools were in them. Then he stopped in the middle of a sentence and said, "I get so tired." And I said, "I know it." And he said, "No, before. All the time. I would sit in the truck." And then he was gone again, and he asked me about the mail. I sat in the parking lot of that care home for a long while after that one. On the third visit, Corinne was there, and we talked out in the hall for 20 minutes. And I asked her, as carefully as I know how, when it started. She said the family always said it started at 78, after her mother died, the way people always say it started after something. But she said that if she is honest with herself, and she has had a great deal of time to be honest with herself, the man she remembers from when she was in high school was already forgetting names, already losing his temper over nothing, and then not remembering the argument, already sleeping in the truck between calls. She said her mother used to make excuses for it, and the excuse was always the same one, which is that he worked too hard. She said, he did work too hard, so that was never a lie, exactly. I asked her how old he would have been then. She did the arithmetic on her fingers in a hallway that smelled like floor wax and said, 51, maybe 52. I was 39. On my fourth visit, Elmer said something to me. We were in the courtyard, and it was cold, and I had been talking at him for 20 minutes about nothing, the way you do. And out of the middle of it, he said, clearly in his own voice, "You do not work the Lundgren place before 10. I said, "Why not, Elmer?" And he said, "Because it comes up out of the draw in the morning." Then he asked me if the mail had run. That is all I ever got. 9 words. But those 9 words are a man in his 80s with a mind that has been taken apart, still holding on to a rule he made for himself 60 years ago about a specific piece of ground and a specific time of day, because it kept him alive long enough to become the man in that chair. I checked the Lundgren place. There are 4 circles in the draw. Let me tell you why nobody leaves. Because I know what you are thinking, and I thought it too, and it is wrong, and it is important to me that you understand why it is wrong. The first reason is the land, and the land is a trap with a very simple mechanism. In that country, a family's entire net worth is dirt, not savings. Dirt, 200 acres, 400 acres, a house that is worth almost nothing by itself. And the day anybody formally establishes that there are undocumented, abandoned wells venting sour gas on a piece of ground, that ground does not go down in value. It goes to a number nobody will say out loud, because there is no lender who will write a note on it and no insurer who will cover a house on it. Wendell Ackley asked me exactly the right question in his own lot in June. So there is a silent, unanimous, entirely rational agreement across a whole county that this is a thing everybody knows and nobody documents. Nobody organized it. Nobody had a meeting. It is just what 1,000 people each independently decided in their own kitchens. And it holds, and it has held since before I was born. The second reason is that it is not spectacular. I have thought about this a great deal, If the ground killed 20 people in one afternoon, there would be a federal response and a documentary and a fund. Instead, it takes an 81-year-old in a cellar and a hired man in a stock tank pit and calves in a bottom pasture, and it takes 51 years off the front of somebody's mind so slowly that his own family thinks it is age. Every single one of those events has a perfectly ordinary explanation available to the person writing the report, and the ordinary explanation is always the one that gets written, because the person writing it has 40 other things to do. Drowned in a dry pond. Heart. Age. Bad luck. Careless. The third reason is the one that is about me and that I did not want to look at. I was tired all the time. Everybody in Quillen is tired all the time, and it is the town joke, and we say it is the water. I had headaches almost every working day. I had a temper that had gotten worse in a way my sister noticed before I did. I was forgetting things and covering for it. And when I tried to imagine actually leaving, actually selling the trailer and the anvil stand and going to some other county and starting a book of business from nothing at 41 with a back that is already 11 years older than I am, my mind would hand me reasons. Good ones, practical ones, with numbers on them. Nobody put those reasons in my head. That is the part one want to be very clear about. Because there is a version of this story where something is whispering to me, and that version is a lie, and it is a comfortable lie. There is nothing under Loomis County but rock and water and gas and rust. Every one of those reasons was mine. I made them in my own kitchen, with my own mouth, in a brain that had been running 8 hours a day on air that was 9% worse than the air 3 feet higher up. A man does not need to be haunted to talk himself into staying somewhere that is killing him. He just needs the alternative to be expensive. Here is what I actually did, and I am telling you this part because it is not heroic, and because I am tired of stories where the man drives away at the end. I did not leave. I could not leave. My trade is a route, and a route is 110 clients built up over 18 years, and it does not transfer. My sister is here, Owen is here, and he still works with me, and I am not going to be 400 miles away from him. What I did instead was smaller, and it has cost me almost everything socially, and I would do it again. I wear the meter, every day, all day, on my collar, and I have a second one that I set on the ground where I am working, and when it alarms, I stop working, and I do not care what is half nailed on. I do not work between first light and 9 in the morning anymore, anywhere, ever. Not after rain, not on calm days, not at all. I lost 11 clients over that in the first year, because early morning is when farm people want you. I will not go into a cellar, a pit, a dry pond, a silage pit, a manure lagoon, a well house, a culvert, or a trench, for any reason, for any animal, for any person. I carry 300 feet of rope, and I have practiced throwing it, and I have used it twice more since Owen. And I keep a list. It is 41 addresses long now. It is places in 4 counties where I have measured something I will not work in, and I do not go to them, and when people call, I tell them why. And about a third of them get angry with me, and about a third of them get quiet, and about a third of them ask me to come measure the rest of their place. And those are the ones that keep me going. Verna Stokes died in February of last year. Not from any of this. Her heart at 79 in her own bed, which after 41 years of hauling other people's dead animals up out of holes is more than a lot of people in that business get. She left me the books, all 41 volumes and the tri-state lease map in the back of a truck her nephew drove over, with a note that said, in handwriting like a bird track, that she was glad she got to hand it to somebody. I have given all of it to a state geologist and to a university group in Lawrence that is flying magnetometer surveys over old fields looking for undocumented wells. They are real, they are careful, and they are enormously underfunded. They have located 18 wells on that township that were not in any state record. 18 out of 2,641 circles. At the rate money moves, and I have looked at the rate money moves, the township I live in will be finished sometime around the year 2200. Skip died at 11 of ordinary things. I have another healer now, a young one, and I have never once carried her anywhere she did not want to go, and I never will again as long as I live. That is the only rule I have that I would call sacred. There is a new subdivision going in on the north side of Quillen. 11 lots, 3 acres each, on ground the school district sold because the district needed the money, and because that ground has grown nothing but brome grass since anybody can remember. I walked it on a Sunday morning in April with the meter, and I got readings on 4 of the 11 lots, and on lot 7, in a low spot where they have already staked a basement, I got a number I am not going to say in this story, because I have learned that when I say the numbers, people argue with the numbers instead of hearing them. I took it to the county. I took it to the developer. I took it to the school district. I took a copy of a hand-drawn lease map from 1922 showing 6 circles inside the boundary of that subdivision, and I laid it on a table in front of 7 people in a meeting room with a coffee maker in the corner. I want to give you that meeting properly, because it is the closest thing this story has to a monster, and it was 7 people in folding chairs with a coffee maker in the corner and a box of grocery store cookies that nobody touched. It ran 50 minutes. It was on the agenda as an item of public comment, which meant I had 4 minutes and then whatever they felt like giving me. I brought the lease map. I brought my plot of Verna's 41 years. I brought printouts of the state agency documents on undocumented abandoned wells, the ones anybody can download, with the estimates highlighted in yellow. I brought the readings from the 11 lots, dated, with the make and serial number of the instrument and the date it was last calibrated, because I had learned by then that the first thing anybody does is attack the instrument. I laid the 1922 map out on the table, and I put my finger on the 6 circles that fall inside the boundary of that subdivision. The county attorney is a man named Lyle Brumbaugh, and he is not a bad person, and I want that said. He read the map upside down from across the table, which lawyers can do, and then he asked me 2 questions. He asked what the source of the document was. I told him an estate auction in 1979. He asked whether the document had ever been recorded, certified, surveyed, or accepted as evidence of anything by any agency of the state. I said no. And he said, and I am giving you this as close to word for word as I can, he said, then what you have is a private drawing of unknown accuracy, made by a company that no longer exists, showing features that do not appear in the state record. I am not saying it is wrong. I am telling you what it is. I said that the reason those wells do not appear in the state record is that the state record begins in 1935, and the wells were drilled before that, and the company was dissolved before that. And he said, I understand. That is a very good argument, and it is not a legal instrument. That is the sentence. If you take one thing away from this whole meeting, take that sentence. The truth was in the room. Everyone in that room believed me. And there was no box on any form anywhere in the state of Kansas that the truth would fit into. The developer is a man named Denny Wallace, and he is from Joplin, and he was pleasant, and he did the thing that people in his line of work are trained to do, which is agree with everything and commit to nothing. He said this was the first he had heard of any of it. He said he had a Phase 1 environmental assessment on the property, which he did, and which is a real document, and which I had read, and which consists of a record search and a walk of the property, and which found nothing. Because a record search cannot find a well that is not in the records, and a man walking a pasture cannot see a hole that was filled with a cottonwood log in 1931. I said that. He said he appreciated my concern and that he would have his people look into it. The school board president is a woman named Arlene Kopp, and she taught my sister in the 4th grade, and she asked the only question anybody asked that night that was actually about people. She said, "Cole, if we stop this, what happens to the money?" Because the district had already sold the ground. The money was already in the budget. The money was 2 aides and a bus. And if the district turned around and said that the ground it had just sold was unsafe, the district would be sued by the man it sold it to. And the district's insurer would want to know what the district had known and when. And it would go on for years. And at the end of the years, there would be no aides and no bus and possibly no district. I did not have an answer for her either. I have never had an answer for her. A commissioner named Terry Lance said, near the end, that he had lived in that county his whole life, and that if the ground was as bad as I was saying, we would all be dead. And I said, and this is the only moment in the entire meeting I am not ashamed of, I said, "Terry, go over to Independence and sit with Elmer Voss for an hour, and then come back and tell me that again." Nobody said anything for a while after that. Then the chair thanked me for my time, and they moved to the next item, which was a culvert on a township road. I stayed and stacked my papers up slowly the way you do when you are trying not to leave, and Arlene Kopp came around the table and put her hand on my arm and said, quietly, so nobody else heard it, "You are not wrong." And then she went back to her chair. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time again. I have spent a considerable portion of my adult life sitting in parked trucks. Here is the thing I finally understood that night, and it took me until I was almost home. I had been waiting for somebody to be lying, all the way through, from the fungus rings to the lease map to Verna's books. Some part of me had been braced for the moment I found the cover-up. Because if there is a cover-up, then there is a person. And if there is a person, then that person can be beaten. There was no cover-up. There was a record system that starts in the wrong year, an insurance market that cannot price an unknown, a school district that needs 2 aides and a bus, a lawyer who is correct, a developer who has a valid report, a commissioner who is genuinely not convinced, and 11 families who want a 3-acre lot and a new house at a price they can afford. Every single one of those things is reasonable. Put them together and they will build a subdivision on top of 6 holes that go down 1,300 feet into a gas-bearing formation, and not one person involved will have done anything wrong. They broke ground in June. I drive past it about twice a week. There are foundations in now and framing on 3 of them, and there is a sign at the entrance with a picture of a family on it, and one of the lots has a sold sticker across the corner. And every time I go by, I think about the fact that in 1951, somebody stood on that same section of grass and looked at a nice level piece of ground with nothing on it and could not see a single thing wrong. That is the part one need you to take with you, and it is not the gas. For 130 years, the ground under that town has been telling the truth to every living thing that gets close enough to the dirt to hear it. Mares standing in lots, cattle that will not water at a pond, a blue heeler with his feet on a running board refusing, pale rings in the grass laid out on a survey grid so regular that a child could have seen it was made by people. It was never hiding. We just built at 5.5 feet, and we made our decisions at 5.5 feet, and everything that was trying to warn us was living at 2.